displayed this same formal pattern around the Cenotaph, a pattern that goes back beyond the first red poppies, now worn by almost everyone behind the crowd barriers and along the pavements. The service contingents, which stand on the quiet thoroughfare itself, usually so busy with bustling traffic, form three sides of a square around the Cenotaph. And they alone wear no emblems of remembrance upon their uniforms, for they themselves are the young inheritors of unforgettable traditions of service and loyalty. And they remind us that it is young men we are here to remember. To the west of the Cenotaph, 3 officers and 87 ratings from HMS Excellent represent the senior service. The first casualties of the First War, only 2 days after war was declared, were 151 crew members of HMS Amphion who went down with their ship. Central Band of the Royal Air Force leads the youngest of the 3 services, the Royal Air Force, which was only 2 years old when the Cenotaph was unveiled by the Queen's grandfather on another 11th of November, this very day, 64 years ago. 3 officers and 69 men of the Queen's Colour Squadron from Uxbridge march along Parliament Street to Whitehall. Beside the Guards Memorial on Horse Guards Parade, about to move off to form the 4th side of the square around the Cenotaph, the most important people here today, ex-servicemen and women, members of the Royal British Legion, more than ever before, almost 2,000 more than in 1981. Among them at least 2 old contemptibles, men who served with that brave little army that fought so gallantly against such odds under Sir John French from August to November 1914. And the old contemptibles have always come to the Cenotaph on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, even when Armistice Day gave way to Remembrance Sunday. Tom Olive is one of the babies of the old contemptibles. He's 89, wearing the soft hat. He was in his teens when the 1914 war broke out, and he was sent to France with his regiment, the Army Service Corps, drove ammunition lorries with iron-rimmed wheels all over the Western Front. He wouldn't miss an 11th of November at the Cenotaph for anything.
Oh, you must go. Oh, you must go. You must see old Charlie or old Fred or whoever it is, you know. You meet a few days before that. You say, you're going? Yes. Oh, yes, I'm going. You sure can imagine? Oh, yes, I'll manage. Yes, that's all right. And we go, and we always will go until the last one, I think, is gone. I don't know who's going to be the last. I think, personally, what I think is, what have we done it for? That's what I think. Why all this? 2 wars? Where have we got? Nowhere.
Another old contemptible was Charles Barnett. He served with his father's old regiment, the 2nd Wiltshires. He was a corporal, 16 when he joined up. He'll be 94 this week, and he knows what he'll be remembering.
The men that we left behind in Belgium, the men that we're go there to honor the memories and everything. And those people that want to do away with Remembrance Day are very selfish and think only of themselves. They don't give a thought to the 2 million men that sacrificed their lives so that we could live in freedom. In fact, they should go down on their knees and pray to God that we had men like it. Because it's something that I'm afraid that we will never forget. We'll always remember them. And they should no more think of doing away with Remembrance Sunday either now or 200 years' time.
Minstrel boy. In 1914, the youngest old contemptible went to France as a boy trumpeter. He was 16, and this is the countryside he saw. By the 16th of August, 12 days after war was declared, the bulk of the British Expeditionary Force had disembarked. On the 21st, they entered Belgium and made for Mons. These were regular soldiers, back in a part of Europe well known to British armies of the past. In 1914, no rifle had been fired on the continent by a British soldier for almost 100 years. Here, by the side of the road from Mons to Brussels at 7 a.m. the next day, the first cavalry charge of the war began, and the first shot was fired. On the 11th of November 1918, at 11 a.m., when the Great War ended, a Canadian infantry battalion had its advance post by the side of the selfsame road where this hotel and restaurant now stands. Only 25 yards, 4 years and 3 months, and from 10 nations, 10 million dead. Few who fought in the first Battle of Mons on the 23rd and 24th of August could have guessed what suffering and what slaughter lay ahead. For this began, like other and older wars, with drums carried into battle. 15 regiments of British cavalry, many carrying lances like this. The 5th Royal Irish Lancers were at Mons during the British retreat of 1914 and the recapture of the town 51 months later at the end of the war, 66 years ago today. On the same day as regiment arrived at Mons, the 21st, Private Parr of the Middlesex Regiment set out alone on a scouting mission near this canal. He was on a bicycle, and he never returned. He's believed to have been the first British soldier to be killed in the Great War. His battalion headquarters was this farmhouse at Oborg. The road to it has been called the Avenue 4th Middlesex. The mud of Belgium was to become so familiar and so deadly to a whole generation of young men, welded into comradeship by their experience. Those who survived had to live for the rest of their lives with the horror of the sights they had seen, the cries of anguish they had heard. On the day after Private Parr was killed, 2 lieutenants of the Royal Flying Corps flew in their Avro aircraft on a reconnaissance flight southeast of Mons. The pilot was Lieutenant Waterfall, the observer, Lieutenant Gordon Bailey. They belonged to one of 4 aeroplane squadrons serving with the expeditionary force. These 2 rusty plaques at the edge of a ploughed field mark the spot where their aircraft was shot down. They became the first aviators to be killed in war. The date, 1914, can just be made out. And this is the report of what they saw. Baggage wagons pulled by teams of horses. Infantry on the move. Their flight began at 10:16 a.m. We now know it ended at 11:10. The British line, when the Battle of Mons began in earnest on the 23rd, was along 2 canals north of the town. The railway bridge at Nîmes on the Canal du Centre was defended by a single company of the 4th Battalion, the Royal Fusiliers. It was to be held to allow the planned Allied retreat southwards to take place in an orderly fashion. At 8:30 a.m. on the 23rd of August, from the wooded north bank of the canal, the enemy advanced on the bridge in close column, fell back, and after half an hour, attacked again in extended order. 2 platoons sent to help in the defense of the bridge were decimated. By midday, the whole canal was under attack. The command was given to abandon the line. Lieutenant Maurice Dees, who was 24, with a machine gun, covered the retreat of what remained of his company. Their escape lay over 250 yards of mercilessly flat and open ground. Five times wounded, he was dragged from his gun, unable to move, and died nearby. Private Godley from East Grinstead, 25 the week before, took over and held the bridge for 2 hours alone. He too was wounded, but before capture threw the gun into the canal below. He received the Victoria Cross. And posthumously, Lieutenant Dees was also given the highest award for his selfless gallantry. He became the first VC of the First World War, recorded in the London Gazette of 16th November, 70 years ago. Fond memory brings the light of other days around me. Oft in the stilly night played by the massed bands of the Guards Division, conducted by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Riding's Coaching Guards. As the pipes and drums of the 1st Battalion Scots Guards play now the Border Lament, Flowers of the Forest. The sad sound of the piper's lament dies away over a silent Whitehall. And the mass bands will now play Nimrod from the Enigma Variations by Sir Edward Elgar. To the east of the Cenotaph, an officer, 24 troopers of the Household Cavalry, Blues and Royals. Beside them, one officer and 16 gunners of the Royal Horse Artillery, and another 16 gunners will fire the gun and horse guards to signal the beginning of the silence. 3 officers and 57 guardsmen of the 2nd Battalion Coldstream Guards represent the Foot Guards. The town of Mons in Belgium was liberated in November 1918 by the Canadians and again by the Americans in September 1944. The liberation of Western Europe began 3 months before here on the beaches of Normandy, 20 years before this French boy and his girl were born. On D-Day, 40 years ago, 24,970 men were landed here on Gold Beach. 400 died without leaving the beach, caught in the murderous fire of the defending guns. On neighboring beaches, another 108,000 were landed. 10,000 of these were killed on D-Day itself. 900 years ago, an invasion fleet set sail for England from the coast of Normandy. 40 years ago, 6,900 ships came eastward to these waters, where a fisherman launches his lonely craft on a quiet Sunday morning. Rusting hulks of the Mulberry Harbour are a massive memorial to great deeds done well. And landward in Normandy there are many crosses of sacrifice, as in all British war cemeteries. But this cemetery is not in France, it's in Belgium, near Mons, where the first land casualties of the 2 world wars were buried. The Germans laid out the burial ground around an existing artificial mound after the Battle of Mons in 1914. And among their own dead, they buried with respect and admiration those who belonged to the British force, which they had called contemptible in its smallness. An upright granite stone honors the dead of both sides. And this circle of graves is marked by the name of the British regiment in which they were all numbered. They had fought so well that their adversaries gave the regiment a new prefix, Royal. lies another of their number, Private Parr, who cycled into the unknown one summer day in August 70 years ago. Now cared for so well by our own Commonwealth War Graves Commission, German and British graves lie side by side. Summer sun and winter rain fall gently on both alike. In death, there is no winning side. Led by the processional cross, the children of the Chapel Royal, in their tunics of scarlet and gold, with their choir master and the gentlemen of the Chapel Royal, lead the procession of clergy onto Whitehall, through the Guard of Honour of Queen's Scouts from all over Greater London. 20 boys, 2 girls. And behind the choir, the Chaplain General, the Venerable Frank Johnson, the Sub-Dean of the Chapels Royal, Canon Anthony Caesar, the Bishop of London, who was also Dean of the Chapels Royal, the Right Reverend and Right Honourable Dr. Graham Leonard, who interrupted his arts course at Oxford to serve as a captain in the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry during the war, and his chaplain with him. Taking their position to the east of the Cenotaph, and it is there that the Bishop of London will conduct the act of worship after the 2-minute silence. And so, quietly and slowly, the pattern is built up around the Cenotaph. As added to that pattern now are the parliamentary representatives. The Prime Minister, Mr. Steele, Mr. Kinnock, and for the first time, representing his party, Dr. Owen, Mr. James Molyneux, representing the Ulster Unionist Party, Sir Geoffrey Howe, the Foreign Secretary, carrying his distinctively coloured wreath, Lord Chancellor, Mr. Speaker Wetherell, members of the Cabinet, 3 former Prime Ministers are here, Mr. Callaghan there, Mr. Heath and Lord Wilson are with him, Dr. Paisley as the leader of the Ulster Democratic Unionist Party, and the head of Plaid Cymru too. As from the former Home Office building comes the procession of High Commissioners and representatives of 39 independent Commonwealth countries. The Commonwealth who lost well over 500,000 men in the world wars. The royal balcony above, always present on this occasion, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, Princess Alice, the Duchess of Gloucester, Princess Anne, Princess of Wales, and King Olaf, now 81, born in Sandringham, the grandson of Edward VII, who spent many of the war years here in Britain. The service chiefs, Admiral Sir John Fieldhouse, Chief of the Naval Staff, First Sea Lord, carrying his baton there without a reef, Field Marshal Sir Edwin Bramall, Chief of the Defence Staff, General Sir John Stanier, Chief of the General Staff, and the Air Chief Marshal, Sir Keith Williamson, Chief of the Air Staff. And so it's almost 2 minutes to 11. Shortly before the ceasefire sounded at 11 a.m. that ended the Great War on the 11th of November in 1918, the advance guard of a battalion of the Canadian Infantry arrived at this canal near Mons. 3 or 4 soldiers of A Company rushed the bridge and reached the first house. One man ventured out again and was shot through the heart. He came from Nova Scotia. His name was Private George Price. It was 2 minutes to 11, and he was 25. And at 1 minute to 11, Her Majesty the Queen, with the royal princes, will walk from that door to take her position to the north of the Cenotaph, in front of the great phalanx of ex-servicemen. Majesty the Queen with the Duke of Edinburgh. Last year they were in Kenya at this time. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, uniform for Commander in the Royal Navy, and Prince Michael of Kent, formerly a Major in the Royal Hussars. And when the 3 royal princes have paid their compliments to the Cenotaph, they will stand to attention with Her Majesty the Queen for the 2-minute silence, which will begin with the firing of a gun and horse guards and the first stroke of 11 o'clock on Big Ben. The royal equerries bearing the wreaths, which will be laid on the Cenotaph, stand beside them. We remember those who died in 2 world wars and on active service since, those who suffer still from wounds of body and mind, and those who mourn. Last post sounded by buglers of the Royal Marines. On behalf of the nation, Her Majesty the Queen lays her wreath of poppies on the Cenotaph in Whitehall. Squadron Leader Timothy Finneran moves forward to give Prince Philip his wreath, as the Duke of Edinburgh lays it now beside that of the Queen. Major Jack Stenhouse hands to the Prince of Wales his distinctive wreath of Prince of Wales feathers. Captain Roland Duckworth hands Prince Michael of Kent his wreath, former Major in the Royal Hussars. His father was killed in active service with the Royal Air Force 42 years ago, just after Prince Michael's christening. Looking so like his grandfather, King George V, who unveiled the Cenotaph, laid a wreath on the coffin of the unknown warrior on this very day, 64 years ago. Major Sir Ralph Anstruther lays a wreath on behalf of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. She watches, as always, lost a brother in the First World War. 2 were wounded, 1 taken prisoner, and she helped to cheer wounded soldiers who were convalescing at her old home at Glamis. So the royal wreaths, all made at the poppy factory at Richmond, having been laid, a sequence of orders rings out to each of the 6 service detachments in turn to stand at ease. Household cavalry have sloped swords, and then the massed bands of the Guards Division, under the direction of Lieutenant Colonel Richard Riding's Coldstream Guards, will play the Funeral March No. 1 in B-flat minor by Beethoven, as the parliamentary, Commonwealth and service wreaths are laid upon the Cenotaph. Mrs. Thatcher, as Prime Minister, playing the first wreath. The leader of the opposition, Mr. Neil Kinnock, who was only 2 years old on the day of the Normandy landings, lays a wreath on behalf of Her Majesty's opposition. Leader of the Liberal Party for the past 8 years, Mr. David Steele, lays a wreath. And he is followed for the first time from Northern Ireland by the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Mr. James Molyneux, the 4th largest parliamentary party. Mr. Molyneux, who served in the Royal Air Force for 5 years during just after the Second World War. And for the first time as the leader of the Social Democratic Party, Dr. David Owen lays his wreath beside the other parliamentary wreaths, as Sir Geoffrey Howe, the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, steps forward with his wreath made at Kew Gardens on behalf of the remaining dependent territories. Blooms and evergreens native to places such as Hong Kong, Gibraltar, the Falkland Islands and the West Indies. And now the Commonwealth will lay their wreaths. Commonwealth wreaths from the old dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and from the first independent nations of the new Commonwealth, India, Sri Lanka, Ghana, and Malaysia. Eleven nations independent now for over 20 years. Cyprus, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Uganda, Kenya, Malawi, Malta, Zambia, and the Gambia, which became independent in 1965. To the south of the Cenotaph, the representatives of Singapore, Guyana, Botswana, Lesotho, Barbados, Mauritius, and the Kingdom of Swaziland, which came into being in 1967 and became independent in 1968. Mr. Mamba from Swaziland is the Senior High Commissioner this year. And now the Kingdom of Tonga, Friendly Islands, Fiji, Bangladesh, Bahamas, Grenada, Papua New Guinea, Seychelles, Dominica, which achieved independence 6 years and 8 days ago, Eastern Caribbean states, Zimbabwe, Belize, and the Sultanate of Brunei. The wreath of Antigua and Barbuda just on the corner there, as the chiefs of the three services lay their wreaths: Admiral Sir John Fieldhouse, General Sir John Stanier, Air Chief Marshal Sir Keith Williamson. On the bottom step, below the service chief, before the service chief's wreaths, we laid the wreaths on behalf of the merchant services and the civilian services. Captain Dinny representing the merchant navy and the fishing fleets, Captain McGrath, the merchant air services, and His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Fire Services, the civilian services. Dr. Graham Leonard, Bishop of London, will conduct a short act of worship, beginning with a prayer.
O Almighty God, grant, we beseech thee, that we who here do honor to the memory of those who have died in the service of their country may be so inspired by the spirit of their love and fortitude that, forgetting all selfish and unworthy motives, we may live only to thy glory and to the service of mankind through Jesus Christ our Lord. Teach us, good Lord, to serve thee as thou deservest, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for any reward, save that of knowing that we do thy will, through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Unto God's gracious mercy and protection we commit you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace, both now and evermore.
Amen.
One by one, the service detachments are brought again to attention. The Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, the Household Cavalry carry swords, the Army contingent, the Royal Air Force and the civilian services. And the trumpeters of the Royal Air Force prepare to sound the morning call of awakening for those who sleep. Reveille. A last salute from the Royal Princes, and Her Majesty the Queen leaves Whitehall, passing through the representatives of the Parliament, the religious communities of this country, the Guard of Honor of Queen's Scouts. The gentlemen and children of the Chapels Royal walk before the Bishop of London. With him his chaplain, the Reverend John Shepherd. Scarlet, gold tunics of the children, gleaming out amongst the white cassocks. As the sun almost shines through the cloud. And so the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, Leader of the Liberal Party, and the Leader of the Ulster Unionist Party and the Social Democratic Party, the Foreign Minister, the Lord Chancellor, Mr. Speaker, leave Whitehall. The former Prime Ministers leave. And now the High Commissioners. Leaving their wreaths on the steps of the Cenotaph. The service chiefs. The merchant service representatives, the representative of the civilian services. Leave. The Major General salutes the Cenotaph, Brigade Major and his ADT with him. Major General James Eyre, General Officer commanding London District, Major General commanding the Household Division, in charge of the parade this morning. And suddenly, from the ground, there has blossomed red these tributes to the fallen. Last of the religious representatives leave Whitehall, Chief Rabbi, the representative of the Roman Catholics, and the Free Church representatives. And the service detachments will now be stood at ease. The Household Cavalry will slope swords. As the chairman of the GLC, Mr. Iltith Harrington, came from his hometown of Merthyr Tydfil to work as a schoolteacher in Brixton. He is head of community links at a secondary school in Bethnal Green, became a councillor in Paddington at the age of 26. And he returns now to the former Home Office building as we prepare for the laying of the Royal British Legion wreaths. Mass bands play trumpet voluntary, and led by the President, General Sir Patrick Howard Dobson, former Vice Chief of the Defence Staff, cavalry officer served in Burma, Middle East, Italy and Germany. Who moves slowly to the Cenotaph to lay the Legion wreath. British Legion, the Royal British Legion, which does so much on all the other days of the year for ex-servicemen and their families, and ex-service women too. as the President moves back to a position north of the Cenotaph. So the other representatives of the ex-service organizations will move forward. Mrs. Bigmore, who received the OBE in the New Year's honours, is chairman of the Royal British Legion Women's Section. Beside her, Dr. Faulkner Cameron in the kilt, chairman of Royal British Legion Scotland. Nearest to us, the London Transport representative, Mr. David Harman, who joined the Royal Navy in 1943, aged 17, landed in Normandy on D-Day with Royal Navy commandos. Royal Air Force Association represented by Group Captain the Earl of Ilchester. Royal Naval Association by Mr. Joseph Riley, chairman for 2 years of the Royal Naval Association, served in the Fleet Air Arm in the Far East in World War II. And Major General the Honourable Stanley Eskell, representing the British Commonwealth Ex-Services League, an Australian, chairman of Prince Philip's Appeal for Commonwealth Veterans, to be launched next year. And so in Whitehall, the dead are remembered. From the fields around Mons, with its memories of that first confrontation on a summer's day 70 years ago, the crosses of sacrifice spread westward across Picardy and south to Normandy and the Channel ports. Each cross is not one grave, but a whole cemetery of graves. From Valenciennes, by Cambrai and St. Quentin to Amiens, northeast to Albert, north again to Arras and Vimy Ridge. For this is the Somme, where in one morning 10,000 died by breakfast time. Only 2 years ago, the bodies of 49 British soldiers of the First World War from 5 infantry regiments were found on the Somme battlefield. They were put to lie with those who are laid in earth, a score together in the tiny battle cemeteries, 22,000 in one huge cemetery north near Passchendaele. And some of these scattered sepulchres, corners of foreign fields in the 100 square miles of Belgium and France, have homely names given them by the men who lie there: Beehive, Brown's Copse, Buff's Road, Artillery Wood, Bunyan's, Cabin Hill, Dud Corner, Happy Valley, Gunner's Farm, Hedgerow Trench, Hyde Park Corner, Irish House, Lancashire Cottage, Level Crossing, Railway Cutting, Lone Tree, Maple Leaf, Mud Corner, Nine Elms, Sanctuary Wood, Oxford Road, VC Corner, White City. Northward, still towards Belgium, the soil of Flanders made rich with its planting of youthful lives. Over 100 cemeteries in the 15 miles between what the young soldiers of the Great War called wipers and armentiers. 3,620 cemeteries in France and Belgium, 457,819 men buried and named, 157,737 laid to rest whose names were not known, 321,843 whose graves were lost upon the battlefields and were never found. And of course, not only across Europe. The graves of those we remember today are scattered across 5 continents, in 140 countries, from Norway to the Falklands, from Surrey to Hong Kong, Burma, Singapore, Malaysia and Japan. In parched desert, under the Arctic snow, in the depths of the sea, and thousands of miles from home. In Whitehall, the bands have repositioned so that those who are left, those who grow older with the relentless march past of the years, may prepare to do honor to those they left behind, whose picture in the mind's eye remains unchangingly youthful and unwearied. Behind these bands, and as far as the eye can see, 5,800 ex-service men and women, some veterans of the conflicts that have gone on, claiming lives and limbs in the so-called years of peace. Men and women, some carrying proudly the symbols of the medals they've won. The military medalists. And for the first time today, Normandy veterans here. Ex-royals, limbless ex-servicemen who've insisted on being here for the second year. A Royal Air Force wreath there, stretching all the way back to Horse Guards. From the women's services, from the voluntary aid detachments, nurses, British Limbless Ex-Servicemen's Association was founded in 1932. There are 100 branches, something like 10,000 members. The mass bands playing Fame and Glory as the 6,000 ex-servicemen wait to march past the Cenotaph. The director of music gets a signal to say that all the royal cars have left the back of the Foreign and Commonwealth Work Office building. There is some delay. And so, like these ex-servicemen, we wait the beginning of the march past in Whitehall. Bands of 4 foot regiments represented: the Coldstream Guards, the Irish and Welsh Guards, and the Scots Guards. The music now stops, and we're prepared for the beginning of the great march past, what so many find the most moving part of this remembrance ceremony. As led by members of the Executive Council of the Royal British Legion, the march past the Cenotaph begins at 100 paces to the minute to the old tunes which the contemptible little army of 1914 and its new comrades of Kitchener's army from workshops, offices, factories and mills sang so cheerfully and so innocently as they marched to the front line. Members of the Royal British Legion, from the Midlands, from London, from Ireland and Northern Ireland, and members of the British Commonwealth Ex-Services League, the ex-service organisation which represents 36 countries. Members include Ireland, South Africa and Nepal. The War Widows Association of Great Britain, now passing the Cenotaph. Burma Star Association, Royal Tank Regiment, Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen, the 8th Army Veterans, Veterans Legion from Netherlands. Sherwood Foresters, the Rats of Tobruk. Chelsea pensioners. Paras. Canadian veterans are here. Normandy veterans. This is members of the Royal British Legion from the southwest, from the northern area, from Wales. Fellowship of the Services, the RASC and Royal Corps of Transport, Airborne Recce Squadron and Para Squadron of the Royal Armoured Corps, the Combined Services Association. So the long column heads away towards Parliament Square and Westminster. So the tradition of remembrance is carried on with renewed urgency by a new generation whose imagination of what war could now mean for this planet is as vivid as the memories of what war was once like to other and older and perhaps less selfish generations.